Hi, welcome back to the channel. This week we're looking at mod remaps within Serum 2. And before I knew Serum 2 was going to be the absolute beast that it's turned out to be, the mod remap function was really what I was looking forward to most. And I think, to be honest, it is quite underutilized and underappreciated. And basically I'm talking about in Vital, because that's the one that it really shone in. And I'm happy to see it's now basically replicated in Serum 2. So what is a mod remap then? Well, the best way to describe it, let's add a macro to cutoff. Let's just put this on a unipolar. Let's make this a bandpass. Doesn't really matter, but that will do. So now we have macro 1 assigned to cutoff, and obviously nothing special whatsoever. If I turn the macro up, the cutoff moves linearly exactly in line with the macro. However, if we go to the mod matrix here, and then we double click on the curve here, we can now interrupt that linear flow. So let's draw in a curve like this, something completely at random. Now when I turn the macro up, it's going to follow this curve. Instantly, very high, then it will drop despite the fact I'm still increasing the macro. Then back up, back down, and then back up again. So that in itself isn't that exciting because that would be possible with an LFO. If you draw this same curve in an LFO, then attach LFO 1 to the source here, that would be exactly the same. There is nothing exciting there so far. So let's put this back to linear, a straight ramp like so. So now as time increases along the x-axis, the depth also increases, which is why when we had it earlier, we had something like this. As time increases, the modulation depth follows this curve, and then it obviously drops down when time gets to here. Now I'm saying time, but that's not entirely accurate when it comes to the mod remap. Time is how it works in an LFO, and I think it's the best way to conceptualize what's happening here. But instead, if you replace time with the macro level, you can see actually when I move this, that the macro moves along this x-axis. So the x-axis isn't time at all, it is macro 1 depth, or macro 1 in this case anyway. So that is conceptually how they work. And in terms of a practical application of that, let's go to LFO 1. We're going to go to our shapes here. Let's go rhythmic, and then we let's go to rhythmic 1 here. Doesn't really matter. I'm just going to pick some at random. Let's duplicate this to LFO 2. And the reason for doing that is because now I can click across and move to rhythm 2. This to the same, 3, and you guessed it, 4. So now we have 4 discrete shapes on each of the LFOs. Let's assign that to the cutoff. And let's change the rate to 1 bar. So now when we play this back, each of these 4 LFOs are acting on the cutoff simultaneously. Let's, instead of having macro 1 assigned to the filter, instead let's assign it to the modulation depth. So we can just drag it up like so. So now when we play back a key, we should have no modulation at all until macro 1 is increased. So just flat, and then the modulation starts to come in when macro 1 is increased. And just to recap, that's because macro 1 is defined as the auxiliary source here. But like I said, that is triggering all LFOs simultaneously. So now, what if we go to our mod remap here? And there are 2 places where the mod remaps live. So you have the one that we showed at the start, which is over here, and that is the mod remap for the source. And then the second place is the mod remap for the auxiliary source. So let's click here, change this to 4 because we have 4 LFOs, or think about how many discrete states you want. How many positions do you want in the switch essentially? And remember, X is the amount the modulation knob is turned, and Y is the depth. So that means we want, on the first one, we want the first quarter of the knob to be 100% active. That's going to assign all of the modulation instantly to LFO 1, but then once we get past 25%, it's going to apply no modulation. So you probably guess what's going to happen. If we go to mod remap 2, let's put it on the second quadrant, the third, and you guessed it, the fourth. And now when I adjust this dial, you will hear it flick between these 4 discrete LFO shapes. That's 1. And you can tell it's 1 because we just have 2 peaks, but nothing towards the end. And let's have a look at 2. It's kind of a bit of a wiggly bit here. Let's listen for that. There we go. Let's listen for 3. We get 2 peaks, one at the start and one on the, looks like the 9. And then the final one, once again you can hear that that shape is very much being applied. And I should state in this video, don't expect to hear the most mind-blowing patch. That's not the point of this video. I'm going to keep the programming very, very simple, just so you can focus on how this mod remap function works. Let's now add another filter. And this one I'm going to choose, once again, something very, very obvious. And the reason for choosing something very, very different is so you can obviously hear the difference, the changes. Let's obviously send this to filter 2. So filter 2 sounds like this, and filter 1 sounds like this. So 2 very distinct sounds, so you know which one is playing at a time. Now what we're going to do is, let's once again assign these LFOs to the filter cutoff. And with macro down at this level, it's playing both filters simultaneously, but the pattern in LFO1, pattern in LFO2, 3 and 4, just like we had before, but both filters being applied simultaneously. But I want to enable only one filter at a time. So let's now attach the macro to mix. Let's turn it down to 0, and then the modulation depth all the way to 100, and then also do the same for macro 1. So now we have it set so that the macro is still applying the cutoff modulation, but it's also increasing the depth of the filter. So with macro 1 down to 0, there is no modulation at all, and it will start to increase the mix and also start to apply the shapes in the LFOs. But like I said, I don't want these filters to be applied simultaneously. So let's get back to our matrix. Let's ensure we have macros assigned to the filter 2 frequency modulation. Once again, let's adjust our mod curve. So essentially this is just repeating what we did for filter 1 frequency. And then down the bottom we have the mix of filters 2 and 1. Let's just change that because I'm pedantic like that. And then here in the mod curve, let's change the grid to 8. And we're going to draw in a shape like this. And I'll explain in a moment. So the previous modulation slots, we had 4 sections because there were 4 LFOs. So we had section 1, section 2, section 3, and section 4, or LFO1, LFO2, LFO3, and LFO4. We're now splitting each of those sections up into 2. So we're going to have filter 1, LFO1, filter 2, LFO1, filter 1, LFO2, filter 2, LFO2, and so on and so forth. And let's do the opposite here. We're going to have this down. So now when macro 1 is at its lowest, it's going to not apply filter 2, instead going to apply filter 1, but it's going to play LFO1. And then for the next one, for here, it's going to play filter 1 and LFO2. And let's have a listen to that. So the macro at 0, it's very clearly playing this LFO shape, and it's also very clearly playing the clean bandpass here. But when I turn this up above 13, or 12.5 really, then it's going to still stay on LFO1, but switch to filter 2. We go 13. There we go. Let's just do a bit of gain adjustment there because it's quite loud. So filter 2, still shape 1. Now above 26. LFO2, filter 1. LFO2, filter 2. So on and so forth. So we've essentially created 8 discrete states that can be switched between in one macro using the mod remap. And just because I'm having fun, let's do another one. This one, we're going to add something quite obvious. Once again, let's go with something like a distortion. And let's go with, I don't know, downsample. Let's attach macro to that. And now with macro down, there is no distortion or no bit crushing. But when I increase it, it starts to come in. But let's go once again to our matrix here. And this time we're going to go 16. So once again, we're splitting up. We had the 4 split, then we had the 8 split, and now we're going into 16. So let's go like this. I'm sure there's a curve already saved for this. And in fact, I might save my own if there's not. But for now. So now we have an on and an off for distortion or for bit crushing for each of these curves and for each of the filter types. So it's on. Let's give it a bit more gain. So bit crushing on, off, on, off. So really, once you start playing around with it, you will soon discover that the options are basically almost limitless. You can create a mod remap for basically any inputs and then decide on the curve that will take. It's one of those functions where the only limit really is your imagination and creativity. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.